today was nutty on a lot of levels, but I think it is worth preparing ourselves for the fact that this weekend might be even a little bit nuttier. And that's because for all the weirdness that we've just been through, we are heading right into a whole bunch of stacked up deadlines that I think are really going to put whipped cream and cherries and extra nuts on top of the nut sundae we have already been enjoying. First of all, Monday morning is when the president's longtime personal attorney, his longtime employee at his business, the Trump Organization, Michael Cohen, is due Monday morning to report to federal prison to start serving his 3-year prison sentence for, among other things, a felony campaign finance scheme to pay 2 different women about $250,000 in hush money right before the presidential election so they wouldn't publicly make claims about having had affairs with President Trump, so his campaign would not be adversely affected by any attendant publicity. Now, prosecutors in the Southern District of New York have been explicit in saying that President Trump himself was also not only a participant in those felonies, he directed the commission of those felonies. He was the sole beneficiary of those felonies. But it's Michael Cohen who's going to prison for them, and the president's not. All the president got out of it was a cute little nickname, Individual One. And I mentioned this thing about Monday morning, not just to keep track of what's going on in Michael Cohen's life and in that case, but I think it's sort of prudent to be on the lookout overnight tonight and through this weekend to see if Michael Cohen may have one more rabbit he wants to pull out of a hat in order to potentially give prosecutors something new and valuable they could use in a case against somebody else that could potentially cause them to intervene, to cut down or delay him serving his sentence. I mean, it's also possible that we may hear from Cohen in a way that isn't designed directly to reduce his sentence, but it could be designed just to try to equal the cosmic score a little bit between he who is going to prison and the guy who directed him to commit those felonies who is not going to prison. So again, Michael Cohen's prison report date is Monday morning. This last weekend is his last weekend of freedom before he's in the federal prison system. And that is going to loom large, I think, in the news over this weekend until he is locked up. Monday is also, coincidentally, the deadline that Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, Stephen, he prefers to be called Stephen, not Steve. Monday is the deadline that Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin set for himself as the date by which he will respond to the House Ways and Means Committee, whose chairman has demanded copies of 6 years of Trump's personal and business tax returns. Now, this tax returns thing is not a friendly request from Congress to get President Trump's tax returns. It is a legally binding demand. There is clear black-letter law that has been in place since the Warren G. Harding Teapot Dome scandal, which says the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in Congress shall be given any tax return that he or she requests. The IRS legally must comply with such a request from the chairman of that committee. So far, they have not. And now the Treasury Secretary himself has gotten involved to try to block the IRS from handing over these tax returns. He says that by Monday, this upcoming Monday, he's going to have some further assertion about what he and the IRS are going to do on this issue. Honestly, it's really not their call. They do not have any legal wiggle room here, as every previous Treasury Secretary who has commented on this matter has attested to. But on Monday, we're going to find out what exactly they're going to try to do. Monday is also the response deadline on the subpoena that was sent to Capital One Bank and Deutsche Bank, requiring those 2 financial entities to hand over voluminous information about their financial dealings with President Trump and the Trump business. Those documents are due to be handed over on Monday to the House Intelligence Committee and the House Financial Services Committee. Now, the deadline on that subpoena for them to hand all that over, it's Monday, May 6th. But it came about through an unusual process, and it's sort of since been shifted. David Enrich, the financial editor of the New York Times, wrote about this week. He says, quote, lawyers for Deutsche Bank have spent months cooperating with investigators from 2 Democratic-controlled congressional committees. Once the requests from the committees reached a certain point, the banks asked, and then the committees issued what one lawmaker calls a friendly subpoena. That was a couple weeks ago in mid-April. So the banks were already preparing to hand over lots of information, everything the committees were asking for. A couple of weeks ago, the banks asked, please, may we have a subpoena It's not that we're not cooperating, but they wanted a subpoena basically to cover their butts. So legally, it would be clear that they had no choice but to hand over these documents. That's why they got this friendly subpoena with a deadline of Monday, this upcoming Monday, to hand everything over. Enrich at the Times got some incredible detail about what exactly the banks have been preparing, have been putting together to hand over to Adam Schiff and Maxine Waters, the two chairmen of the committees that have requested this information. Quote, the rich trove of records held by Deutsche Bank includes internal corporate documents, descriptions of the value of Mr. Trump's assets, and portions of his personal and business tax returns. The subpoena casts a wide net for documents related to Trump's businesses and other entities, including family trusts. Quote, the subpoena demands Deutsche Bank hand over materials related to the Trump family's companies, including parents, subsidiaries, affiliate branches, divisions, partnerships, properties, groups, special purpose entities, joint ventures, predecessors, successors, or any other entity in which they have or had a controlling interest. Did we miss anything? In terms of the character of the materials that the banks plan to hand over, quote, bank officials have compiled reams of material to hand over. Included in those documents are multiple pages from each of Mr. Trump's annual federal tax returns. Now, again, Deutsche Bank and Capital One are cooperating with the committees on this. They have been working with the committees for months on how to prepare these materials to be handed over to Congress. They asked, please, may we have a subpoena? Congress said, yes, you may. Here you go. The friendly subpoena says these documents have to be handed over by Monday, by this upcoming Monday, May 6th. They're all poised to go. It's all ready. And then President Trump sued the banks to stop them from replying to the subpoena. Now it's interesting. The Democratic-controlled committees have decided they're basically going to go along with that lawsuit. They are not insisting that the subpoena stands and its deadlines stand. They're not insisting that these banks still have to hand these materials over by Monday. The Democratic-controlled committees have allowed for a delay until this can be adjudicated in court. The bank-related subpoena to Deutsche Bank and Capital One, that will have its day in court on May 22nd. After the court rules on that subpoena and whether or not the banks have to comply, the banks say they will comply with the court's order. That is the same basic dynamic that happened with the other congressional subpoena targeted at the president's accounting firm, Mazars. That subpoena went out from the Oversight Committee a few weeks earlier, before the bank ones. The deadline on that one for Mazars to hand over all their financial materials related to President Trump and his businesses, their deadline for handing stuff over was April 29th. But again, Trump sued to stop Mazars from handing over material in response to that subpoena. Again, the Democratic-controlled committees decided to respect that lawsuit. They've agreed to delay the production date on that subpoena, on that one involving the accounting firm Mazars. They've got themselves a court date on May 14th. And again, the court will rule and Mazars will comply with whatever the court order is. Now, honestly, I have not talked to a single legal expert or even a single well-informed reporter who believes that the Trump lawsuits to stop those subpoenas are going to succeed in the long run. But they have succeeded in the short run, right? They've already caused delay. We would otherwise be expecting reams of Trump financial documents, including pages from each of his federal tax returns, to be handed over to Congress on Monday. That has temporarily been paused while they fight this out in court. But that delay is only going to last so long. Nobody thinks those lawsuits are going to succeed in the end. They're going to succeed in delaying it until they fail. But the delay itself is maybe what they're after. And then Tuesday is the deadline for Don McGahn, the president's former White House counsel, who did dozens of hours of interviews with special counsel Robert Mueller. Don McGahn is cited more than 150 times in Mueller's report, including as a key witness and a key character in many of the most memorable descriptions of the president's alleged obstruction of justice. Immediately after the redacted Mueller report was made public, the Judiciary Committee announced that the first witness from the Mueller report who they wanted to appear before them was Don McGahn. They issued a subpoena to compel Don McGahn to hand over documents and for him to testify in person. Well, the deadline for him to hand over documents comes first, and that's Tuesday, next week. Now, the White House has insisted that they will fight the Don McGahn subpoena. They don't want him to testify. They insist they have the means to stop him from handing over documents and from testifying. Nobody has seen those means in action at this point. Don McGahn and his attorney have not commented directly on their plans in terms of responding to this subpoena. We asked Mr. McGahn's lawyer tonight if he intends to comply with the portion of that subpoena that requires McGahn to hand over documents to Congress by Tuesday. So far, we have not heard back. We'll let you know if we do. But you can see why we're in this sort of unsettled moment, right? This uncertain moment where all these deadlines are coming up. And the president says he's going to block all of this somehow, right? Forget that black letter statute about handing over anybody's tax returns. The Ways and Means Committee just can't see his taxes. We'll tell you more on Monday. Right? Forget that subpoena. Those companies can't hand over those financial records, either from President Trump's banks or from his accounting firm. Forget those subpoenas. They're just not going to do. Oh, forget that other subpoena to the White House counsel. He can't hand over documents. He can't testify. In fact, the White House now asserts, and the president now asserts, nobody can testify. Nobody can hand over documents. The president said this past week, we are fighting all the subpoenas. And that is a little nutty, right? That is a little crazy. But that is also what it was like at this moment exactly 45 years ago, in May 1974. NBC presidential historian Michael Beschloss was tweeting about this today because he is the kind of presidential historian who gives you a little constructive giblet every single day that helps you understand the current news. But you see the headline there from the New York Times, May 1974. Nixon rejects subpoenas, tells Rodino he will get no more Watergate data. Rodino in this case is Peter Rodino, who's the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. He had the job then that Jerry Nadler has today. Right, but there's Nixon saying that Rodino will get no more Watergate data. Oh, how far we haven't come, right? And looking back on what Nixon was trying to do back then, looking back now with the advantage of hindsight, we of course know that Nixon was doomed to fail in that hardline stance. But back in May 1974, Americans didn't know how that was going to end up. Congress didn't know how that was going to end up. It was a time of uncertainty and frustration and, honestly, some fear.
Good evening. President Nixon today laid down one of the strongest challenges any president has ever put to any Congress. He told the impeachment investigators in the House of Representatives that he will not comply with the Judiciary Committee's latest subpoena for 11 White House tapes, and the president added that he will decline to comply with any future subpoenas. He told the committee he had given it all the Watergate material it needs, as he has said before.
President Nixon used familiar White House arguments and firm language in refusing to answer the Judiciary Committee subpoenas. He wrote Chairman Rodino, quote, "The committee has the full story of Watergate insofar as it relates to presidential knowledge and presidential actions. Production of these additional conversations would merely prolong the inquiry without yielding significant additional evidence. The Constitution does not spell out an easy solution to this kind of confrontation. Congress could vote to cite the president for contempt, but that would not produce the evidence, and Mr. Nixon and his lawyer are confident that a contempt of Congress citation would not be an impeachable offense."
At the Judiciary Committee, where the challenge from the White House was received today, there was strong reaction.
No members of the Judiciary Committee appeared surprised at the president's refusal, but they were disturbed and unhappy about it, Republicans and Democrats alike. Chairman Rodino pronounced it a grave matter. Other members had this response.
I think he does hurt his cause before the committee by his failure to comply with what I think is a reasonable request for information which the committee ought to have.
Well, it's very difficult to determine what their plan of action is over there. Certainly it is to delay and obstruct and make our job as difficult as possible.
See, there's nothing new under the sun. I mean, the president now is literally saying Congress shouldn't be looking anymore. This is all. It's done. He says he will not allow White House counsel Don McGahn to testify. He says he will not allow anybody to testify. We know he's now suing in court to stop the handing over of any documents related to him and his campaign and his White House. But presidents have tried this before. I mean, look again at that headline. Nixon tells Judiciary Chairman he will get no more Watergate data. That was the unsettled place this country was in May 1974, 45 years ago this month. And now, of course, we look back on that headline from May of 1974. And we know how that worked out in the end, right? We know now that that was a nice try by Nixon, brave face forward and all that. But no, I mean, by July of that year, Nixon was told he must surrender. Nixon pledges full compliance. Look at the subhead there. President bows. Look at the subhead under that one, too. But his lawyer indicates there may yet be a delay in yielding the data. So they're still trying to slow it down, even when they had lost that dramatically. Yes, this feels like a very unsettled time. You are right to feel that way, right? With what we've been through over the past couple of weeks. I mean, with what we went through just today, with the other world president who was the subject of Robert Mueller's report, sticking his hand up the back of our president's suit jacket and moving our president's mouth. Like, it's right. It's okay to feel unsettled by that. I mean, with these deadlines bearing down on us just in the next couple of days, as the White House and the president's lawyers and his attorney general all seem firmly set on the course of massive confrontation, of blowing through the guardrails, of getting what they want at any cost. But they are not the only players on the field. And honestly, no matter what anybody tells you and how it might sometimes feel, it's not like we are a country that hasn't dealt with this sort of thing before. We've dealt with exactly this kind of thing before. And we know how it worked out. One of the leading Democratic presidential candidates today demanded that the Justice Department's Inspector General open an inquiry into whether President Trump has been telling his Justice Department to start criminal investigations into his political enemies. It's the scariest possible allegation, right? But we've faced allegations like that before, too. And when people have fought back against that in history, the people fighting back against it have won. These fights, they're not unprecedented, but these fights are now the fights of our generation, too. And Senator Kamala Harris is going to join us live here on set next.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.